Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're plunging into the absolute darkest, most terrifying corners of human psychology. We're going to examine the history and the science to discover just how horrifyingly easy it actually is to transform an ordinary person into a willing executioner. So let's just jump right in with a deeply uncomfortable question. It's a really comforting illusion to believe that atrocities are only committed by absolute monsters. But history and science? Well, they ask us a pretty chilling question. Under the right authority, what would you do?
Part 1, History's Willing Executioners. To answer that question, we have to look back into the brutal realities of the 20th century. We're starting with a massacre that completely shattered the myth of the highly trained, quote-unquote, specialized killer. In July 1942, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 arrived in the Polish village of Józefów. Now, these were not fanatical SS officers. They were ordinary, middle-aged, working-class guys from Hamburg, literally just dock workers and truck drivers with absolutely zero special training for genocide. And yet, their actions that day were unspeakably horrific. The cold reality of their assignment was heavily documented. But here's the absolute most vital detail from that morning. Their commander, Major Trapp, was visibly weeping, and he offered anyone who didn't feel up to the task the chance to just step out of the ranks. Out of nearly 500 men, only 10 to 12 opted out. The rest of them chose to stay in line. They marched their victims into a forest and systematically murdered 1,500 innocent people. To put that into perspective, the psychological toll of shooting that many victims at point-blank range was actually so severe on the men that it forced Nazi authorities to seek out more detached means of extermination, which accelerated the shift toward gas chambers. And sadly, this phenomenon, it's not confined to one regime or one war. Decades later, in 1968, American soldiers of Charlie Company entered the Vietnamese hamlet of My Lai. Private First Class Dennis Conti recalled it like this. They were killing everything. Cali began to shoot the children. The soldiers enacted a similar nightmare, finding zero enemy fighters, yet systematically slaughtering over 500 innocent civilians, mostly women and children. Part 2, the laboratory of obedience. The sheer, incomprehensible brutality of Józefów and My Lai begs a terrifying question. Are these historical anomalies born out of the chaos of war, or is this lethal compliance scientifically reproducible? Well, in 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram decided to find out. He set up a sterile psychological lab at Yale to test if ordinary individuals would obey an authority figure, commanding them to inflict immense pain on another human being. Beforehand, psychiatrists predicted that maybe 1/10% would actually administer the highest shock, but the results were bone-chilling. Despite hearing agonizing screams from a hidden actor, 65% of ordinary participants obeyed fully. They went all the way, administering the maximum, potentially fatal 450-volt shock. So, how on earth do we explain this? Well, Milgram theorized they entered what he called an agentic state. It's a profound psychological shift. Basically, the ordinary person surrenders their moral agency, views themselves as just a tool or an instrument, and places the entire burden of moral responsibility squarely onto the authoritative researcher in the white coat. 10 years later, Philip Zimbardo expanded on this idea by building a mock prison in a Stanford University basement. He took ordinary, healthy college students and cast them randomly as either guards or prisoners just to see how systemic roles and environments might dictate cruelty even without direct orders to harm anyone. And it brilliantly illustrates the dark power of the situation. Get this, the experiment was intended to last 2 full weeks, but it had to be abruptly shut down in just 6 days. Why? Because the guards spontaneously adopted such sadistic, cruel behavior that the prisoners literally began suffering acute emotional breakdowns in less than a week. Part 3, mechanics of moral disengagement. So how does an ordinary, sane mind justify this rapid descent into darkness? Let's look at the cognitive gears turning in the background. Psychologist Albert Bandura outlined this in his theory of moral disengagement. He argued that we don't just suddenly wake up and become evil. Rather, we can only commit atrocities by deactivating our internal moral self-sanctions. Basically, we find a way to actively turn off our feelings of guilt and self-condemnation. Bandura identified specific cognitive mechanisms to do this. Essentially, they're structured internal lies.
Perpetrators used tactics like the diffusion of responsibility or euphemistic labeling to cognitively reframe highly destructive behavior as morally acceptable, or, even completely necessary for the greater good. Displacement of responsibility is probably the most gruesome and common tool in this kit. It was famously weaponized by Nazi commanders, by the men of Battalion 101, and by the soldiers at My Lai. They excused the mass execution of innocents by convincing themselves they were simply following orders.
The crucial takeaway here is that this isn't just random chaos. It's a calculated, step-by-step path into darkness. First, you accept the authority. Next, you view yourself merely as an instrument. Then, you strip the victims of their humanity, and finally, you can pull the trigger completely free from the burden of guilt. It's like a psychological assembly line for atrocity.
But, of course, human behavior is complex. Historian Christopher Browning studied Battalion 101 and noted a whole spectrum of motivation. While some men at one end became enthusiastic true believers, a vast middle group simply followed standard operating procedures. And why did they do it? Primarily because they were just afraid to step out of line and look weak in front of their peers. Building on that, modern psychology offers an updated and maybe even scarier perspective. A recent reanalysis of Milgram's archives suggests something called engaged followership. It argues that participants weren't just passively or blindly obeying. Rather, ordinary people actively identified with a scientific or nationalistic cause, genuinely believing their atrocities were virtuous contributions. They thought they were doing the right thing. Part 4. The Ordinary Monster. So, what does all of this mean for you and me? As we confront the chilling legacy of these historical massacres and psychological records, the terrifying reality that you need to take away from this explainer is this: the architecture of evil isn't some rare anomaly found only in psychopaths. No, it already exists within the everyday human mind. It's in us. It really just requires the right societal conditions and the right authority figure to be fully unleashed. So, I'll leave you with this final, incredibly provocative thought. If you were standing in the cold morning air of a Polish forest or the sweltering heat of a Vietnamese village, would you actually have the moral courage to step out of the ranks? Or would you, like so many ordinary men before you, pull the trigger? Thanks for exploring this fascinating, if totally unsettling subject with me today.